my name is Ioannis. I'll be interviewing you today. May I ask what your name is?
Ioannis, nice to meet you. My name is Paige Ames.
I understand you're a trustee. May I ask what that entails?
Well, typically it entails meeting 3 or 4 times a year and helping Jeff and the team kind of make a few decisions around, but Jeff is a very senior CEO, so he kind of knows what he's doing, and so we really kind of take his recommendations, but we're there to support him. Each of us have a role to, a specific role to support. Mine is on strategy and development, so I kind of spend more time with Jeff than most trustees.
Can I ask what you strategize on, what you kind of develop? Like, what do you do? Like, have you any, what kind of projects have you taken a part of?
One of the main projects was staff development, and so I interviewed everyone that works for Jeff and just kind of did my own assessment about what they like to do, what they're good at, and made a few suggestions around shifts in responsibilities, because that would match up better with what they actually enjoy doing. And and then we all had a session after I'd met with everyone and gave my suggestions to Jeff, and we all kind of made it more of a collaborative effort. Does that sound good? Yep, that sounds good. Let's do it. The other thing I looked at was organizing Jeff's what we call KPIs in the corporate world, key performance indicators, and putting that in a language, because most of us that sit on the trustee board are from corporate backgrounds, and so we understand major stretch goals, objectives, and then tasks to do those. And so we put kind of a strategy worksheet together to also convey to the trustees what Jeff and the team were working on, what the priorities were, and deadlines, because nothing's worth anything if there's not a deadline attached.
I understand you had a job in the corporate world. So what did you study in university, if you went?
You know, I went to a school that none of you have heard of in Mississippi called Ole Miss, and I studied marketing. But if I had to do it over again, I would study management, because you got more of a broad look at the way a business runs.
So what advice would you give someone who's wanting to go into management or marketing, as you said?
I think I would back up and say that the advice that I would give someone your age, or even someone in their 20s, would be appearance matters. So normally the people here at the church see me looking one way, and I came in kind of minorly glammed up tonight, but the reason I had no idea I was being filmed, so I'm really glad that I put lipstick on and did my hair. But the advice that I would give would be that appearance matters. You never have a second chance to make a good first impression, and often those first impressions have nothing to do with what you say. So the misconception that, well, I don't have to dress up, I can just wear whatever I want to, because the content of who I am, or how smart I am, or how good I am at what I do is going to speak volumes. That's true, but then they have to get over that you wore trainers and that you didn't, that you weren't looking like the part. The other piece of advice that I got as a woman, but also true for a man, is to dress 1 or 2 levels above the position that you're interviewing for, or the position that you are. So at that point I was a sales assistant, so that I dressed like not a sales rep, but a district manager at the time. And so that has really been helpful. And I guess the other piece of advice that I would give someone in general would be, high performers have choices. So be a high performer first before you start trying to exert your choice on a company. So that's probably more helpful than just management or marketing, because the point I think of university, and I hope parents don't look at this, it's not so much about your major, unless you're majoring something very specific like film or software development or something that's very technical. Mostly people just want to know that you are trainable, teachable, and have commitment and discipline to make good grades and to graduate and have follow through. And so that's really what people, I think, are looking for in a college graduate, so to speak, or university graduate, excuse me. I understand college is different here.
How true to life do you think first impressions are? Do you think they're just like, people make snapshot judgments too quickly, or do they really reflect who you are inside?
That's a great question. And that's another thing I would say, if I can go back to answer the last one, is being curious and asking really good questions of people before you try to tell people about yourself is critical in not just any profession you do, but in every relationship you have with anyone. And I think that's a great question because of social media and how social media you can portray yourself. I think there's a balance to have between this age of social media where we project the image we want to project versus the authentic person that we are. And so the clarification I would make is, I wouldn't do social media, but is that be very careful at this age what you're putting out there into the world on social media, because you can't take it back. It's out there forever. And I remember someone being interviewed in my previous corporate career, and someone said, have you seen their, at this time, Facebook page? And it was wholly inappropriate, kind of, and they didn't portray on Facebook who they were portraying to us. So it's tricky. So I think but I think first impressions do matter as far as having respect for either the interview that you're doing, the company that you're interviewing for, to put yourself together a little bit and make sure that you come off the right way, aesthetically, before you've even opened your mouth.
I was just wondering, do you think body language or aesthetics play a bigger role in interviews and first impressions as well?
Another great question. Body language, they say that, is it 80% of what we perceive of someone is nonverbal? Please, someone check that statistic. But there's a lot of nonverbal, so body language is true. What I would tell you about body language is direct eye contact, which you're doing and which I'm doing. Good posture. Let's do a quick little thing. If I was like this and answering the questions, and if I didn't have any makeup on and my hair was in a ponytail and I was in sweats, how curious would you be about what I had to say? And how credible would I be when I said I've worked in global corporate for 38 years, both in America and here? And I'm talking, Deutsche Bank, the Times, the Sun, Financial Times, Network Rail, big companies, Dow Jones, Wall Street Journal, So I wouldn't have gotten there if I'd not looked the part, but was able to perform. So performance is key, but if you don't ever get the second job interview because you didn't put some effort in the beginning, you don't get to perform.
Why did you choose the career path that you did?
Well, the truth is, I fell into it like so many young people do. My dad played golf with this guy that owned a furniture dealership in Jackson, Tennessee, which at the time was 40,000 people. And he said, oh, this company that I rep is great, Steelcase. They're the largest office furniture manufacturer in the world. Let me get Paige an interview. So Dad comes home and says, let me get you an interview. And I'm like, oh, office furniture? Who wants to do office furniture? I was with them for 16 years. They were an amazing company. So what I would often say to you about poo-pooing something that doesn't sound glamorous, find out what the company's about, find out what the people are about. Some of those people, a lot of those people, I'm still friends with today, 38 years later, because they were such high quality, high integrity, great people. And so I didn't intend to do it, but that led on to workplace consulting, which led me to come over here and give it a go for 3 months, which led to Deutsche Bank, work permit, my own company, and then the rest of those clients. So I can't tell you that I planned any of it. I would tell you that God had a huge part to play in it. When I'd been here for 6 weeks, I was down on my knees saying, okay, God, I've done everything under my own strength. I'm giving this to you. 3 days later, Deutsche Bank called. So for me, knowing what I know now, that whole Denzel Washington, put God first, is the real answer.
If you had the option, would you do it all over again, or would you maybe change what you did?
I tell you what I would change is the workaholic. One of the questions that I got prior to the interview was, I guess something about, I don't remember what it was, but my answer was, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Just because you can work 24 hours or 20 hours a day or 12 hours a day for 7 days a week for a year and a half doesn't mean you should. And I think one of the biggest challenges for my generation, possibly not for your generation, but for my generation, is to not be so focused on delivery and working so hard. So learning what's good for you and what's bad for you, even if the world tells you this is what you ought to do, or your upbringing tells you, from America, I don't know how you perceive Americans, but it's a high performance culture and you're taught to work really hard, and so I would do that differently. That's what I would do differently. But I might not have then had the opportunities that I had, so I don't know.
Do you have any advice maybe for young people today who are looking into getting jobs or going to interviews, or just in general, really?
Well, I kind of said that before, which is to make an effort. The other thing I would say that's different is to research the company, have questions. Smart questions impress people more than your answers a lot of times. So if you've had investigate who you're going to see and kind of know about them. I remember the first interview I ever had with Steelcase, and my father said, Paige, just ask that regional manager about himself, because people love to talk about themselves, and he'll walk out of that interview thinking you're the smartest, brightest, sharpest person he's ever met. And that's exactly what I did. And yeah, so it was good advice.
So asking questions really makes them think that you care.
If there's one thing I learned being in the media and the very smart people at News UK, the Times, the Sunday Times, the Sun, News of the World, Wall Street Journal, all those people, is curiosity. Curiosity about the person you're interviewing, curiosity about the company, curiosity about the industry, right? Don't limit yourself just to that. Curiosity about history, what's happened before. So, if I had 3 things I want you to hear from this, it would be that appearances matter, high performance matters, and be curious.
Cool, you mentioned earlier you have your own company.
Yeah.
Can I ask what the company does?
Basically, you have architects and designers that design big buildings, and then or redoing old buildings, and then you have kind of workplace, or you have consultants that are telling the business how to run, but no one's trying to link how a business wants to redo the way it works and how the space needs to redo, and I sit right in the middle of that. So I consult with the architects and designers, and then I go out to all of the people in the entire organization, in teams or individually, through receptionist up to CEO, and ask them a variety of questions that elicit the responses of how they want to work, who they need to work with, what kind of space needs they need, and even though they don't know it, the fact that we're kind of gently moving them into a new culture. And then I go back to the architect and say, here's what we need, and then I go back to so I'm kind of the interpreter of why we're designing a space and the types of behaviors we're looking for the space. I remember going to a corporate real estate conference in Cologne, and I remember listening to, no offense, guys, but I remember listening to, because a lot of corporate real estate's a male-dominated, was 20 years ago, and I remember thinking, I'll always have a job because I know how to ask questions, and I know how to listen, and I know how to get to the root of what we're trying to do here, as opposed to just doing it the same old way, which is the way some people do. Thanks.
What do you think the difference is between corporate America and the corporate world here?
So I came in 2003, and one of the biggest things that I noticed, and I'm not trying to make this about gender, but this is what I noticed. I noticed because I was an American woman, and because I was fairly strong, presented myself in a fairly strong way, that I got the respect that I deserved. I was certainly paid what I was supposed to get paid. And I noticed that English women were not treated the same way as I was treated. They didn't dress the same way either. I came across super hyper corporate, right? And they didn't. So that was one of my first kind of And so what I would say to you is, I remember thinking to myself, the women in this country professionally in corporate are 25 years behind American women. I would say that's certainly caught up and, you know, is kind of even now. So that was one of the biggest things I noticed, was women's roles in corporate UK was very different than women's roles in America. So that was my biggest, The other thing, and I'm glad you asked that, is Americans, do you know Americans? Do you have any American friends?
I don't know.
Oh, well, now you do. Americans can be very serious and very earnest and very business focused. The English and the UK, I learned very quickly that humor went a long way. My sarcasm, my ability to understand sarcasm and give it back to people went a long way. Taking the mick out of people went a long way, and being able to take it and not taking myself too seriously. So that self-effacing, let me make fun of myself before you can make fun of me, humor here really worked. I remember my first, I think it was probably, I'd been here maybe 3 or 4 months, and a guy at Deutsche who didn't care for me and made it very clear. He was a big wig dealer in our real estate group. And, you know, I wasn't concerned because I came here fully formed in my late 30s, and so I knew that I would deliver, so I wasn't worried about one person who didn't get the page factor. But he turned to me after about 3 months and said, "You're not like most Americans, are you?" And I said, "Whatever do you mean, Jonathan?" He said, "You understand sarcasm." I went, "Do I?" And he, you know, but I knew then that that was a huge, like that's the biggest compliment that an English person can give a American. So those are the things that I really noticed. Other question?
Do you ever feel like you were treated differently as a woman in the corporate industry, and how did you almost overcome that?
I am so glad you asked that question. I am so glad you asked that question. I think my answer is going to surprise you. Here's what I have been, so even though I'm older, I'm not going to talk about my age as much, but even though I'm older, I have friends of all ages, and I have friends' children that are my dear friends' children that are friends of mine. And I first heard about or felt this thing about women being treated differently. Of course, that's an understood thing, but I grew up in a family of, my dad really got women. He had 3 daughters. My mom was really strong, and I think that personal power begins at home. And just like you've heard charity begins at home, well, personal power begins at home. And so I never felt discriminated against. I never felt, the one time that I remember finding out that a colleague made more than I did, and I had a more senior position, or I'd been promoted 3 years prior to him, and he made more. And the reason I was given was because he had 4 children, and I was single. It didn't go over well, but I ended up being promoted out to the West Coast and got a 15% raise, and so then I knew I was making more than him. It wasn't about making more than him, it was around exactly that thing about men making more than women. It's not cool. I mean, it's not cool at all. But one of the things that I don't like about your generation and the 10 years above you is this mentality with women being taught about women being oppressed. We were never taught that we were oppressed. We just kept going. I've never felt oppressed. I felt a little hard done by with that little salary thing, but I've never felt sidelined or glass ceilinged or less than, and I had this conversation with a 21-year-old who goes to St. Andrews. She's an American, and her mother lives next to my sister in Burlington, Vermont, which is why I get all these kids, right? These kids that are coming and studying abroad, I see them all. They run through London. And she and I had this very interesting debate around, but surely you can agree that women have been oppressed throughout centuries. I said, well, I can tell you they've been oppressed throughout centuries, but I can also tell you that if you ask me who I think has the most power, it's women. I believe women have more power. I'm not going to get into all of the socio reasons I think they do, but I think they do. And I think the first thing that you have to understand as a woman is that you have the power. But if you're taught that you don't have the power, and you're taught that over history, look at how women have been degraded or mistreated or discriminated against or not paid as much, then that's a self-fulfilling prophecy too. So what I would love for all women to get is it begins with you. It begins at home. It begins with you owning your own personal power, not abusing it, not manipulating, although I've done both. You know, you have the power, ladies. And you hopefully are mature enough and smart enough on how to use it and to recognize when people are trying to oppress you, it's typically because they're insecure or they're threatened by you or they don't understand or they need education. So let's not just put on the cloak of, oh, poor women, look at what they've done to us. I don't buy it. It's not my life, it's not my experience, and I hope it's not going to be yours.